Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well still, and welcome to today's bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter, Bowie County, Texas. Late one afternoon in November of 1986, my nephew came down and wanted to go deer hunting at Maud. I grew up hunting at the old Berry farm. I put him in one of the deer stands that my brother and I had put up and went to mine. I told him I would come back by the stand that he would be hunting out of so we could get out of the woods together. That afternoon it was starting to get dark, but still light enough to see. I started back towards the nephew's stand. I started up the creek bottom that ran into the big swamp thicket next to the lake when I smelled something very foul. I could hear something moving in the thicket. At first I thought it might be a deer, but it was far too big to be a deer and sounded more like a man walking in the water. So then I thought it was my nephew, and he had gotten down and started coming to my stand, so I yelled his name. So he knew that I was on my way. This thing started moving away from me and fast. Down the thicket, about 50 to 75 yards, there's this little opening, about 30 feet across. This thing crossed the opening, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This creature had to be around 7 feet tall, dark brown fur covering its entire body. It crossed the opening in what seemed to be 5 or 6 steps. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, and I saw something, and whatever this thing was, it was huge. Today's second encounter, 1989, St. John the Baptist Parish, Louisiana. The same L'Observer article that mentioned the Laplace man's sighting near Roddock in 1983 also makes mention of another Laplace man that had a strange encounter on top of a levee near Bayou Steele. In 1989, this man was alone on top of a levee near Bayou Steele. He was waiting for his brother to meet him to go hunting behind the levee. The man heard a noise. Behind him, he turned around and witnessed 2 large red eyes staring back at him. The man dropped his gun and ran. The details of just seeing the red eyes suggest that this sighting happened in the early morning while it was still dark. The credibility to this sighting is that it ran in the paper. Today's third encounter, Ponchatoula, Louisiana. In a new subdivision that was still being developed, named Cheryl Meadows, a 12-year-old riding their mini bike along with the cousin, saw a lumbering creature approximately 500 yards away. The creature was black, hairy, and walking upright on 2 legs. The cousins were riding toward the creature when they spotted it walking on the side of the road in their direction. The cousins decided to turn around and go back the direction they came from to avoid a close encounter with this unknown, imposing, bipedal creature. Once turned around, the cousin looked back and observed the creature now walking in the middle of the road at a quicker pace toward the children. The 12-year-old that was operating the mini bike accelerated so hard that their cousin fell off the back. Once the cousin jumped back on and yelled, "Go!" they didn't look back after that. The same 12-year-old child claims about a month after they were the same cousin in the woods that bordered their neighborhood when they spotted a bush along the train track shake. Out of the shaking brush came a large, hairy arm, grabbed a handful of leaves, and went back in. It was late in the evening and getting dark, so they couldn't see into the brush. The two children ran the entire way home, about a quarter of a mile. This sighting took place just north of the Manchac Swamp region, about a quarter of a mile away from Highway 22. The report suggests that these two encounters took place roughly in the same area. A cattle bridge that crossed the Yellow Water River was mentioned as a landmark in the report. Today's fourth encounter, Gregg County, Texas. I never told anybody about what myself and my friend saw hunting after school one day. I don't remember him or me even really talking about it much. It was in 1987 hunting season, I'm not sure which month. The two of us were walking along a dirt road in the Locker Plant River bottoms. Not sure which of us saw it first, but it definitely caught our attention. We were looking down a right-of-way when this large figure walked out of the trees. It walked along the tree line for several seconds, going back into the trees. At first, we thought it was one hell of a big man, or maybe someone hauling a deer carcass across the shoulders. I remember asking my friend if that guy was wearing a fur coat. We knew that it wasn't a man. The thing was at least 7 feet tall and covered with fur. It seemed to walk like a person. It was too far away to notice any details about the face, hands, or feet. I'm not sure, but I think it noticed us, and that was the reason it never crossed the right-of-way. We knew what we saw, and even with our guns in our hands, we both ran all the way home. Today's fifth encounter, Harrison County, Texas. I have a dog kennel where I raise and sell puppies. Every night when I get up out of bed to go to the bathroom, I look out my window and check on the kennels. My bathroom window looks out over the dog kennels. I don't turn the lights on because doing this would obstruct my view. I thought I was seeing things. There, standing on the other side of the pen, was a 7 to 8 foot hairy creature. The dogs were all in their houses as if cowering, and it was deathly silent. The creature was standing facing the dog pen, at which point he turned to the east and walked about 3 steps, then turned to the north and stood there. That's when I went and got my mother. She as well saw it, but not as clear as I did. It stood there after my mom came, and then it went into the woods. My house is surrounded on 3 sides by woods. It's very secluded. Every night it's here, and we are terrified. It screams often. My children have even heard it. I know I sound like some sort of fruitcake. I don't tell anyone because I feel like people will just think I'm crazy. I'm buying motion lights to see if it will make it go away. This creature is here every night and we hear it scream. I don't know if the neighbors have heard or seen anything. I don't want to be made fun of. Today's sixth encounter, Harrison County, Texas. I was a newlywed at the time and we were at my brother-in-law's place visiting. I'm basically a city boy, but my brother-in-law has grown up in the country out there and knows the area very well. We were out squirrel hunting, and we also went to check on some of his fishing lines. On our way back, we were walking through the woods on what looked like a dirt road. I was feeling very uneasy. I could tell something was not right. We both heard some branches breaking. We heard something hard hit the ground. Right then, we saw it. It walked into the clearing about 50 yards in front of us, stopped and looked at us. It had long, brownish hair and was at least 7 to 8 feet tall. The only place I didn't see a lot of hair was its face. I was very curious. I thought it was someone playing a prank or something like that, so we kept walking towards it. It then walked into the woods and was gone. When we got a little closer, the smell was sickening. We took a look around where it had gone into the woods, but we could find nothing but some broken limbs on the trees. A lot of them were broken up high, 7 to 8 feet taller than I was, with my hands over my head. We kept going to the house, and that same feeling that something was not right wouldn't leave. My brother-in-law was as white as a sheet. As we got closer to the house, we smelled that awful smell again. We heard something breathing and some grunts over to the side of us. We saw it again standing between some trees. At that point, I was wicked scared and just took shots at it. I don't know if I hit it, but it let out a scream or a roar that almost made me piss myself. We both took off running for the house, and it was keeping pace with us. It was in thick woods. Then one thing I remember about it was I could hear it breathing. I could hear the branch breaking as it ran. As we got to the edge of my brother-in-law's property, it stayed in the tree line, back where we couldn't see it, but we could still hear it grunting. We got to the house and got all the kids inside and stayed. That night we heard the sound on and off most of the night. Today's 7th encounter. I grew up in the countryside close to Essex, United Kingdom. We lived in a very rural area surrounded by thick woods and fields. Back then, and there was only a small farm down a single-track road. My first encounter with this thing that I can only describe as a beast was in our garden about 11:30, when I was about 13 or 14. My stepdad had just driven back from the pub, and he was in the kitchen making toast. I went down to get a drink of water. The back garden floodlight was switched off as it was very blinding when it came on. My stepdad noticed something moving about in the garden as he was looking out of the window. He questioned what he was seeing, so I took a look, and as we tried to work out what it was, but we couldn't make it out clearly, so we switched on the floodlight. In the light, we could see all right, as plain as day. This thing was on all fours, drinking water from our pond. It was huge. It was black and very wide and very muscular. It turned and looked towards our house. I'm assuming it couldn't see us, as we were shielded by the blinding light. I've never seen anything like it before. Its face was just like a dog, but it looked much more fierce than any domestic dog, and its features were very strong and defined. This creature was covered in thick black hair from head to toe. My stepdad and I just stood there in shock. It moved away from the pond and then stood up on its back legs and leapt over the end of the tall garden hedge. The hedge was about 10 feet tall, and it had no trouble clearing it. Then the creature was gone. My stepdad turned off the light and told me to get to bed. The next morning he told me that we were never to discuss what we had seen ever again. Whenever I tried to mention the event and what we saw, he just denied it, and it never happened. But that was not the only time I think I was very close to this thing. I was walking my friend home one day, a few months later. We were walking across the fields past the farm's old barn. There was a large, broken hole in the side of the barn, and we had to walk close to it to get down the track. It was around lunchtime, so we were walking in broad daylight. As we got closer to the barn, we both noticed this creature edged inside of the barn, looking out of the hole at us. We were watching it, trying to make out this thing in the dark, when it moved, and I knew it saw us. We both questioned what it was, or what it could be, and we both decided to back off slowly and return the way we had walked. As we did this, the creature moved further backward into the barn. I think it did this to remain hidden. We walked back to my house very quickly, and I never went down there again on my own that I remember. There was one report sent to the police about an unusual animal in the area after something huge ran out in front of a dog walker. The dog walker said it was crossing from one wood to the next. The dogs refused to walk near where the animal was and sat whimpering. The police got castings of some prints from down there, but then it just went hush-hush, never to be mentioned again. So this is my personal experience, and I'm thankful I no longer live in Essex. Tonight's eighth encounter, Harrison County, Texas. Easter Sunday, my husband, 2 girls 6 and 9 years old, and myself had completed our Easter visit with family and decided to take the girls out to his family's land. Just let them be in nature and give him a chance to target practice. We drove through the gate on the dirt road until we came to an open pasture on the right. These pastures are planted for deer hunting. We parked the car in the open area, walked back to the dirt road, and went east to a little pond. Let the girls see the tadpoles and throw rocks. When from behind us there was a loud crunching in the bush. We decided to move back toward the car after hearing nothing more. My husband wanted to shoot his pistol. We crossed the dirt road immediately across the pasture where the car was parked to a deep ravine. I'm 5'7", my husband's 5'10". The sides of the ravine was way over our head. We shot several times when suddenly a large animal lunged into the ravine in front of us, only about 10 or 15 feet. He paused, looked at us, and then in one leap jumped out of the ravine. We froze for a moment, then my husband grabbed my 6-year-old and I took the 9-year-old, and we ran toward the car. And to our surprise, a loud brush noise indicated the animal was running toward our car. It stopped in the brush line immediately in front of our car. We unlocked the driver's side door and shoved the kids in, climbing in behind. He jumped in the ravine between us and the target. Today's eighth encounter, Latimer County, Oklahoma. It was dark, about 8 p.m. My 2 sons and I were watching television, eating popcorn. The eldest, 16, was sitting across the room on a love seat. The youngest, 8, was sitting next to me on the sofa. We were sharing a bowl of popcorn placed between us. I smelled this horrific stench coming from the window directly behind us. My family has teased me about having a nose of a hound. So the 16-year-old says, "Oh, Mom, you're always smelling something." Well, I look around and the smell dissipates. We continue watching television. A few minutes pass and the stench blows in again. I got up while telling my oldest son to help me pull out the sofa, that there was something horrible under it. As he approached, he smells the stench and says, "It's a snake." The youngest moved back. We pulled the couch out and looked all over under the entire room. Came up with nothing. We noticed the breeze blowing the curtain and decided that whatever the source was outside and we'd check it out in the daytime. My 16-year-old went out of the house about an hour later. He came back inside for a shotgun. His dad has taken him hunting since he was 6. He knows guns in the woods. He said someone was standing in back about 6 yards north of the house by the railroad tie post, watching the house. And it was one darn ugly big guy. He took the gun and went toward the chicken pen. I heard him yell from about 50 yards or so from our chicken pen to call the law. I was scared beyond a measure for my son not knowing what had just happened. I called the sheriff. After about 10 minutes, my son came back in the house. He said the guy stepped over the barbed wire fence and jumped over a brush pile while leaving. He hadn't used the gun. The 2 sheriff deputies arrived. They shined the lights up and down the property and found nothing. My son went to his grandmother's house to inform her that we had a prowler. She lived about 40 yards northeast of us. He'd been gone only about 20 minutes when I heard the metal latch on our outside storage building. Someone had gone into the building. Now my youngest son and I were in the house. The eldest, knowing I was already spooked, would not be lurking about. His dad was out of town working, putting up gas rig. The question being, who had opened the latch? The building is my laundry room and contained my washer, dryer, and deep freeze. I phoned the mother-in-law and asked to speak to my son. When he answered the phone, I asked if he had been there the whole time. The answer being yes, I told him someone had entered the laundry building, and to my knowledge hadn't left. He said he would be home. After telling him to be careful, I waited and watched. He was home in 2 minutes. While we were discussing what to do, he yelled, "What the hell is that?" My 8-year-old ran into the kitchen. They both had seen a face in the picture window behind the sofa. The eldest said it was hairy and dirty. I called the sheriff again. My son got the shotgun. My youngest and myself waited behind him, sitting on the floor with the lights out. I fully expected some deranged vagabond to jump through the window. While waiting, we smelled the stench again, as we were only 3 or 4 feet from the window. Then I knew the scent was coming from this person. Knowing this sent chills up my spine. The deputies arrived and again found nothing and left. I never associated this event with a Bigfoot until reading about other encounters. The stench is what ties it in for me, and the description my son gave of the face in the window. The way this character acted just wasn't in keeping with anything I had ever known. But the deciding factor for me was about 8 months ago. I repeated this story to our friends, that retired Oklahoma highway patrolman who hunts with my husband. He said this was out of character for a perp he had never seen. As close as I can describe it, and the scent was a mix between dirty, wet, steamy blue jeans, soiled diapers, and wet, filthy dog. That's why for years I thought we had a deranged or drugged-up tramp lurking about, as my husband had found the signs of someone being in the woods roundabout. Today's 9th encounter, Jasper, Texas. We were four-wheeling on the trails at Ebenezer Park around 11 in the afternoon. My friends and I started out down the trail that runs between Ebenezer and Boykin Springs. We had stopped to check the bike for proper equipment and make sure everything was okay before proceeding. We heard something back at the trucks. The guys headed back to the trucks to see if someone was breaking into our vehicles. My girlfriend and I hung back so we could spend some time together and talk. We were there for at least 15 minutes, and we heard what sounded like a deer walking upon us. So we waited to see what it was. When she stepped out, it was awesome. I had read a bunch of books about Bigfoot and wondered what it would be like to see one. I got my chance. She, you could tell it was a female, stood against a tree like a construction worker, leaning against a shovel. The funny thing about the sighting was I felt like I was in no harm. It was maybe 20 feet away from me, and at no time did I feel like I was going to be harmed. My girlfriend and I sat on the bike for a good 20 minutes. You could tell that she, the Bigfoot, was as curious about us as we of her. She actually didn't turn to run. I had grown up in a little town in East Texas and had squirrel hunted all throughout the woods and wandered the same woods when I was around 15. But this was the first time seeing this. All I could think about was how she looked, how something like this had never been killed. Then after a while she just started to really stare at us. Then it hit me that my dad had told me when I was in the woods that animals hate to be stared at. They get panicky about it. About this time, I thought that it might be a good idea to go our separate ways, so I cranked up the bike, and when I did, she just disappeared into the woods. I told the guys what happened, and they told me that I was crazy, that there was no such thing. Today's 10th encounter, Tyler, Texas. I went to the river camp in the afternoon at the end of October of 1999 to fill my deer feeders. I had a late start, and I was afraid I would get stuck if it started raining in the bottom, so I parked a half a mile or so from the camp. There was a chance of rain in the area, which was good because it had been dry, but it doesn't take much for this area to get wet quick. I filled 2.5-gallon buckets with feed corn and took off walking down the road that leads past the first feeder. I noticed before I got to it the feeder was missing. After closer look, I found the feeder hanging in a tree. It had been wrapped around a limb it was tied to, like a tetherball. The feeders we were using were made of 4-inch heavy PVC drain pipe, about 2 feet long. The rope was about 10 feet long. I was thinking of climbing up the tree, or better of it, when I saw something move to my left. It was about 75 feet away and hiding behind a large oak. I had just seen it, just for a second, and thought I was seeing some strange-looking shaggy hog. As soon as I moved toward it, it started to move off. I followed it for a couple of minutes in the fashion, but I could never get a good look. It was very good about keeping the brush and the trees between it and myself. As this is in place where the river overflows regularly, the runoff end of the slough. There is an excessive amounts of dead trees, brush, and briar at times. Sometimes it piles up so thick that it looks like a beaver dam. I could only catch glimpses of it because of the thick cover. Because of its shaggy appearance, I had begun to believe it was an emu, or maybe two. I know this sounds strange, but a couple of weeks earlier, a man in one of the hunting clubs up the road told me that someone had emptied a cattle trail full of unwanted emus in their club, and I was convinced this is what I was looking at. We continued on this way, moving up the river. We came to an old railroad crossing at another camp house and a boat ramp across the river. We were to the point where they either had to step into the opening or go back the way it or they came, or turn and face me. When it stepped out, I really couldn't believe it. At first, it was a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, woolly booger, or whatever you want to call it. There's nothing else it could have been. I was 50 feet or less away from it. The left side and back were to me, and I couldn't see its face. It was about 7 feet tall, walking upright and covered in long, shaggy hair. It was longer on the arms, which hung to the knee, and covered its hands. The hair was dark grayish-black and reminded me of old hay rolls that had been left out in the pasture uncovered. It had huge, wide shoulders, and the head just sort of blended into them. I didn't see the feet. I would estimate its weight to be 300 pounds. Although it was large, I would describe it as lanky. As it moved over the bank, paused, and moved down the river out of sight. I noticed the hair on its rear end was thinner, and I could see its butt. It was black, and I could see its muscles working. The sighting lasted about 10 seconds. By then, my hands were shaking from the adrenaline rush I was having. I haven't had a rush like that since I was a little boy, about to take my first deer or try and missed. After I steadied myself 20 seconds or so, I decided to go see where it went. I figured it had to cross the river. You can walk across there pretty easily when the river is down, and it was. I took about 10 steps, and a very loud snap came directly behind me. At about 200 feet, that's when I left. I went straight back to my feeder, dumped the corn out on the ground, and got the hell out of there. I was feeling flighty, to say the least. There was no doubt in my mind that when I started following this animal, it was on all fours. If at any time it would have been on two legs at 7 feet tall, I could have seen it clearly. It took full advantage of the thick cover. It didn't stand until it reached the opening of the river crossing. I've heard of the booger monster stories all my life, but never really believed them. I now realize this animal has been here all along. I've seen some strange things in the woods I couldn't explain. Some of them don't seem so strange anymore. If I see it again, he can go his way and I'll go mine.
Well, there you have it, folks. Today's bonus. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps this channel growing and going, and honestly what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Thank you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.